November 1st, 2009. I'd been married to my now ex-husband for 2.5 months. We'll call him Steve. Earlier that morning, he and I had gotten into an argument and he left the house. It was now dinner time and Steve had not come home. I had just finished cooking and started receiving ignorant texts from him. He told me he'd been at the bar up the street from our house all day. I called my best friend for advice and put my 2 youngest sons in the bathtub as I spoke to her. His texts became more ignorant. I informed him that he was being locked out and there'd be a bag on the porch for him. I told him I didn't want him coming home like that and he should sleep it off at his mother's. I locked the doors and put a chair under the doorknobs. I was in the bathroom telling my friend what I had done and turned around to see Steve standing in the doorway. He went to swing at me. I ducked, and he grabbed a hold of my hair and dragged me all through the house. I screamed for my oldest son to call the police. Steve let go of me and chased after him, and I ran the other way to the bathroom. My son and I reached the bathroom at the same time. We ran in and slammed the door, with just enough time to throw the lock. I dialed 911 and just screamed my address over and over again into the phone. We remained in the bathroom until we heard the police. Needless to say, I called my mom. She took me to the magistrates, and I was granted a protection order. 6 police officers met me back at my house. They informed me that they had not found him, but his truck was still parked at the bar. The officers did a thorough search of all 3 floors of my house, my backyard, my shed, and my garage, before they would let us back in. My mom agreed to spend the night with us, and we could gather our things in the morning. 2 officers came in and showed us how to barricade the doors. One of them told me to call them immediately if there were any more occurrences, or if I just didn't feel right. He said the 30 seconds it takes to decide if I should call could be a matter of life or death. The officers left and my mom and I barricaded the front door and the door that went downstairs. I put my 3 kids to bed. That's when the house phone began to ring. I saw that it was Steve's number and took the phone off the hook. I then began receiving numerous texts from him. I called the police and then turned off my phone. An officer responded and told me they were still outside looking. However, they did post a car in the lot at the end of my street to keep an eye on the house. When the cop left, we barricaded ourselves back in. My mom had me go to my room to try to get some sleep, and she would stay on the couch. I'd been in bed for about 10 minutes when my mom came in my room. She said she was hearing noises. I came out to listen, and the ice maker was making ice. I told her that's always doing that, and not to worry. Then I went back to bed. About 20 minutes after that, my mom came back in looking absolutely terrified and on the verge of tears. She said she was hearing noises like there was someone upstairs. She reminded me of what the officer had said about not hesitating to call. As I was in the process of turning my cell phone back on, I heard what she had been hearing. It was coming from directly above us. This would have been the attic, as it ran along both sides of the upstairs. It sounded as if something was shuffling around. Now panicking, I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher we were hearing noises and needed someone to check it out. He said he was sending someone immediately. I hung up the phone. That's when we heard the attic door creak open and loud footsteps on the hardwood. They were slowly coming down the stairs. I began screaming because there have been many times I've creeped myself out at night thinking I hear noises, and there's never anything there. But there was someone this time, and he had been barricaded in the house with us all night, making his calls and texting me from only a few feet away, listening to our conversations, hiding in the dark, not far from where my son was sleeping. Thankfully, my mom was thinking clearly. She grabbed me by my shirt and threw me into my room. The police had arrived at this point because I could see the flashlights and hear the commotion outside. It was Steve. They got him. To get into the attic, there was another door inside the upstairs hall closet. The police must not have seen it when they were checking the house. My mom told me later that she had turned to face him as he came down the stairs. She ran over to the door and removed the barricade, just as the police pulled up. She said he didn't put up a fight and dropped to his knees in the yard, and that there were about 10 cops with their guns drawn on him. I wish I could say that my nightmare with Steve ended here, but I cannot. I endured a long bout of PTSD and was terrorized by this man for several more years. He has stalked me, broken into my home, etc. However, this is all I can manage to write for one night. He's left me alone for about 2.5 years now, but I can't seem to shake the feeling that he's just biding his time.
So I figured I'd share my story here because I find it pretty creepy to say the least. This started a few months ago. One day it was frosty outside and wet. My roommate dropped me off at my work and came back home. Later that day when I came home, Ken said, "This sounds weird, but listen. When I got home from taking you to work, there were icy footprints on the step. These were huge footprints." "Huge?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "This had to be at least 3 sizes bigger than both of our feet. The print started at the lawn and stopped at the front door." I laughed and told him he's been watching too many scary movies, but inside I kind of freaked out. Then we started noticing things. Like the day we were watching a movie and we heard our sink turn on. Or the other day I was in the bedroom and he was outside and my door slammed shut. Then Ken started noticing things moved. The dog's bowls were moved, empty when we had filled it up 2 hours prior, and the dogs had been inside the entire time. One day Ken and I agreed to keep all doors shut inside the house because it was really hot outside and we were trying to keep the house cool as possible, with all the doors shut and the lights off when we weren't home. When we returned home, 3 lights were on and the door was open in the bathroom. This was all weird, but this was where it really got me. One night I was sleeping and I heard something fall on my top shelf. I was creeped out because I knew the attic door was right above the shelf and that door just creeped me out. I immediately opened my door and I saw nothing, but still I was terrified. I shut the door, but I immediately opened it again, and that was when I saw a hand pulling the door shut. I screamed and Ken came running. I could not speak. I was madly pointing at the attic. We called the cops. They came and found nothing. I didn't want to go back, but I had nowhere else to go. A few weeks later, Ken and I had an idea. Our mutual friend lives out of town, and we were going to Skype her for her birthday. We set up the phone and set it up so where it would sit and we wouldn't have to hold it. We were talking to our friend on Skype, suddenly turned pale and stopped talking. "Show me your dogs," she said randomly. "What?" we asked. "Just do it now," she said frantically. We agreed, and when we were outside, she said, "There was someone in your house. They were peeking out of the attic." "Get out of your house. Someone is in your attic." We were freaked out and left. The cops came. Turned out some homeless freak had been living in our attic for God knows how long, and that was it. Worse, he had 3 knives with him in the attic. If we hadn't Skyped our friend, well, I don't want to know.
I grew up in a small town in South Dakota. When I was really little, probably about 4 years old, I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house, which had an attic that had been remodeled. My brother and I usually slept up there whenever we would stay at their house. One time when I went up there to get a toy or something, I saw a little girl sitting against the bookshelf with her head down crying. I closed my eyes for a second, and when I reopened them, she was gone. I had quite a wild imagination, so I decided that I probably just imagined it. I wasn't really scared of her, more just confused and caught off guard. I didn't tell anybody because I knew that no one would believe me, and I wasn't even sure if I had really seen anything anyway. That was the first time I saw her. The second time was probably about a year later, when my grandma sent me up to get something out of the closet for her. This time she was standing at the back of the closet, behind some boxes, looking straight at me, and crying again. This time it scared me, but I still decided not to tell anyone. A few months after that, my cousins who we were very close with were staying at this big house for the summer with their mom, who was taking care of it while the family that owned it was away. My mom took my brother and I over there to have a sleepover with our cousins. My cousin Devin, who was my best friend growing up, was staying in one of the rooms upstairs. She brought me up there to show me how big the room was. Then she said, "There's also a secret room. You just have to go through the little secret door in the closet, and it takes you to the clubhouse." She was notorious for lying about things to impress people, so I thought she was making this up, but she actually wasn't. She opened the closet and moved some stuffed animals out of the way to reveal a small door. She opened it, and there was a small room that was just bare plywood that looked like it would give you splinters if you so much as looked at it wrong. In that room, there was another small cupboard-like door straight across from the one that Devin just opened. She told me that that was where the clubhouse was. I was hesitant, but I agreed to crawl in there behind her. After crawling through the small plywood room and entering the clubhouse, I immediately felt very uneasy and terrified. The room itself wasn't scary. It was just a small L-shaped room with a star-shaped window straight ahead from the entrance. There were dusty old pillows and blankets on the floor, and old faded photos taped to the wall. It seemed exactly like something I would have thought was really cool at the time, but for some reason it freaked me out so bad that I got out of there and immediately went downstairs to tell my mom, who was still visiting with Devin's mom, that I didn't want to stay the night, and I just wanted to go home. My entire life, I have had reoccurring dreams about that tiny clubhouse. I've never known what it meant, but I've always wondered if there was some sort of correlation between that and the little girl I saw in my grandparents' attic, because sometimes in my dreams, she's in there. Flash forward about 10 years to when I was 16 or 17. I had a very vivid dream that I was at my grandparents' house. In the dream, my Aunt Sue and I were the only ones there. I remember being in the main living room, talking to my aunt about how I really wanted some clothes from the 1960s. She told me there's some in the other room. All I have to do is go in there, lift up a piece of carpet, move a loose floorboard, and go down there. There's a dresser that has all kinds of clothes in it, but I have to be careful, because there's a girl who lives down there, and she doesn't like it when people go through her things. If this had been real life, obviously I would have said, "Hell no, I'm not going down there." But of course, Dream Me thought it was a perfect plan. So I did what Sue told me to do. It was a huge room down there, but messy and dark. The only light was coming through the hole I just climbed through, but it was enough to help me see most of the room and the dresser that I came down there for. I started going through the drawers, when suddenly, I heard a loud, high-pitched scream come from behind me. I turned my head, and just for a moment, I caught a glimpse of the girl. It was the same one I saw as a child, and the same one I had dreams about for years, but I had never seen her so close before. This time, it looked like she didn't have any eyes, just black holes where her eyes should have been. I only saw her for a brief moment before she pulled me to the ground, and that's when I woke up. The entire day following that dream, I felt really off. My brother must have noticed, because when we went to Taco Bell that afternoon for lunch, he asked me if something was wrong. At first I said I was okay, but after a few minutes I decided to tell him about the dream I had. But I didn't mention anything about seeing her as a kid. All I said was that there was a little girl that screamed and pulled me down, and that's when I woke up. What he said after I finished telling him the story made my heart drop to my stomach. Did the little girl have curly brown hair? And was she wearing a pink dress with flowers on it? Keep in mind that I never told anyone about her before. I asked him, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because I've seen her there before, at Grandma's house. I saw her standing at the top of the stairs in the attic." I told him that I had seen her up there too, and we talked about the dreams I've had. From that day on, I started having nightmares about her every night. I remember one where I woke up in my dream to her trying to cut my eyes out, and a lot of other freaky things like that. I started losing a lot of sleep, And I think I was getting a little delirious, because I started having a hard time knowing when I was asleep and dreaming, or when I was awake. One night, I was lying in my bed looking at my phone in the dark, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye, standing in front of my door. I looked up and saw her there. I immediately reached over and turned my lamp on, but when I looked back, she was gone. Did I doze off for a second and dream that she was there? Or did I really see something? A few nights later, I was laying on my side, facing a full-length mirror I had on my wall, when I saw little feet walk behind my bed and heard someone messing with my stereo. And then I woke up to the sound of my stereo turning on by itself. Things like that kept happening, but the nightmares gradually stopped, and my life got back to normal. To this day, I shiver when I think about these things, and whenever I go back to my grandparents' house, I'm too scared to go up to the attic alone.
I know that typically people share encounters on here, but I know after finding the subreddit that I needed to share this. This happened to my wife's aunt, Sarah. I apologize that I can't relay some of her emotions, and at times have to skip on a few details, as it is a second-hand account as told by my wife. This was 10 or 15 years ago, and Sarah had recently been divorced. Her husband moved out, and Sarah continued living in the house by herself for some time after that. The house was in a typical neighborhood and wasn't secluded or off by itself or anything. As Sarah became used to living alone, she felt like she kept hearing things in her attic and began to wonder what was making the noises she heard. She called the police and had them come and sweep her attic looking for any traces of anyone living up there, but they found nothing and told her she probably just heard a raccoon or a squirrel. In the days after the cops came to her house, she felt like the noises were getting louder and that there was no way that it was a small animal. She called the cops again a week later and the same thing happened. They didn't find anything again. A few days after the second call to the police, Sarah came home from work earlier than usual. Fortunately for her, she had already started dating during that time, and her boyfriend was with her when she came home that day. As she got out of the car in her garage, she noticed something out of place and scary as hell at the door. A pair of muddy men's boots. I like to think that if she had been alone, she had had enough sense to not enter her house at that point, but luckily her boyfriend was with her. They cautiously entered the house and discovered upon entering the door, standing naked in the laundry room doing his laundry. Sarah went to call the police, but the phone wasn't working and she ended up going next door to use the phone. I'm fuzzy on the details here, but they managed to keep him in place for a time before the police arrived and they took him away. Turns out that this guy had access to her house somehow, and he had indeed been spending time in her attic. The cops found a small hole in the attic above her bedroom where he had been watching her, and on that day he cut the phone line and put a knife under her pillow. God only knows what would have happened if she came home by herself, but thankfully that didn't happen. I don't know any more details about the guy other than the fact that the cops took him away, and he's presumably spending some time in a jail cell rotting away.
Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Whoa. If you want me to tell your story or read a creepypasta, email me at the address in the description. I want to thank Agentshadowolf for working with me. There's a link to his channel in the description, and that's where the other half of this collab is, so check him out. Be good to animals, even people. See ya.
Ja, snämar, bergsbes, herish.
She brought me up there to show me how big it was. She brought me up there.
What's your daddy doing?